Hey folks, Tim Newman with Soft Flight Studios bringing you yet another installment in our series, Composition, Seeing and Being Seen. Today we're bringing you another installment in our mini-series titled, How Is It Seen? In this series we take images that we think are relatively compelling and we discuss how they were visualized and captured out in the field and basically what it took to bring this final image to life. I think this is interesting information. Hopefully it's helpful to all of you as photographers. One of the things that I would like to add in here today is I would like to give a big shout out to Frank Ruggles, who was kind enough to comment on this image this morning and really made me take a second look at it and think, this would be a good How Was It Seen subject. I was fortunate enough to run into Frank 2-3 years back in the Dolly Sods Wilderness doing a sunrise shoot and grabbed a silhouette of Frank. Didn't know who Frank was at the time, but turns out really nice guy and one hell of an accomplished photographer. And I really appreciate his taking time out of his schedule to comment on the image. It means a lot to me. I keep running into Frank in national parks in various places around the U.S. unplanned, so that's a pretty cool thing when you start to connect with somebody in the photography community that way. I think Frank's one of those guys, and there's a handful of them out there that just has an incredible passion for the image. So I relate to that completely, and I find myself looking at a lot of his work as well as other photographers, and I find it inspirational. And as a shout out to all those photographers, I encourage you photographers that are coming up and learning to go and look at other photographers that are out there and figure out what you like about their work, and then how did they get those images, because that's how you learn. Let's take a look at this picture. The image that we're going to look at today is an image titled River of Light, and it's from the Bach Hollow Nature Preserve just outside of the Hocking Hills State Park. First time I've been there, and really excited about going back there again and working this a bunch of different ways. So here's the picture for you. Now, as I typically do when I arrive at a location where I'm going to shoot a landscape scene, I spend a little bit of time trying to hone in on the composition that I think is best for the scene at hand. Now, when I first arrived here at this scene, outside of what I would call this little corridor here, the scene is much wider with a larger body of water out front. And I originally saw this as a landscape image in terms of its orientation. And then as I was kind of moving my tripod around and looking at the scene, this portrait orientation is the one that really finally stuck out in my mind. And I think two things brought that together for me. One was the natural vertical walls here in this corridor and each of these little fins of rock that sticks out and builds them progressively. And then I noticed the reflection of the waterfall itself off the water, and I thought, wow, we've got some really great lines pulling me to the center here. I think we're fairly well anchored in the four corners, which is something I look for a lot in my landscape images. So from lower left, lower right, and even upper left and upper right, I think we have a number of lines that pull us into the center of the frame. I think if we look at the division of the frame from left to right, we've got pretty reasonable division into thirds there. I don't know that we necessarily have thirds top to bottom, but given the waterfall and its reflection from top to bottom, I thought a center line focal point here was the way to go, and I don't very often do that. In fact, I advocate kind of trying to figure out what the strongest 2/3 of the frame are top to bottom, and then frame up accordingly. But at this one just naturally felt like that was the way to go. Last but not least, you can clearly tell that it is a long exposure, and I really like the representation of the waterfall here in terms of the white in the scene. Now, as I look at this, I want to go back and shoot it again, and we'll take a look at the technical specifications in a minute, because I think ideally this could be redone as a focus stacking frame. Now, of course, the concern there is, will we ever get that exact amount of light the same way again? But I think it's worth going back and trying. Here's some of the technical specifications involved in shooting this picture. It's a 30-second exposure, and that's where I get that milky look in the waterfall and in the water leading up to the base of the waterfall as well. An aperture of f/16, which I feel left me lacking a little bit of the depth of focus that I wanted there, but I also know f/22 puts me into a potential soft spot on that lens. So that's why I think going back and doing this as a focus stack at f/8 may be the ideal treatment for this image and that scene. ISO 50, just because I wanted the long exposure I could get without pulling my neutral density filters out. And then reading this scene and looking at the histogram, I had to knock off 3 2/3 stop of light from the exposure just because the meter was nailing that information wrong. And that's something that I think is a critical thing for everybody to be able to do out in the field, is look at that histogram and adjust and not always trust your meter. This was shot on a Sony a7R III camera with Sony's FE24-70 f2.8 GM lens on the front of it. I really like this combination of camera lens. It's done a pretty good job for me over the period of time that I've been using it. I kind of vacillate back and forth between it and my Mark IVs from Canon because both of them are great out in the field. Like I said in the past, Really Right Stuff L brackets on everything I've got with battery grips. Fits my big hand really nice. And then a Really Right Stuff Series 3 carbon fiber tripod, which I would be lost out in the field with that combination. I absolutely love having that stuff at my disposal. We'll catch you with a real quick wrap up and then we'll be out of here. Well, there you have it, River of Light. I hope the insights that I shared here in the past couple of clips were helpful to you and they enable you to look at scenes and maybe capture images a little differently or a little better than you have in the past. That's what we're here for, is to share that passion with everybody around us. So get out there and think about these things and shoot more and more pictures and get really compelling images that you're just dying to share and tell people about as well. And when you're out there shooting, remember, as we always say, learning equals skills, practice equals mastery. We'll see you out there.